It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulson and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Take Command podcast. That's Logan Paulson. I'm Craig Hoffman. I hope that everyone had a great weekend as we sit here with you on a Mailbag Monday. Logan, how you doing?
Excellent, man. Excited to talk some of these questions. And, you know, it's always a bummer on Monday, but it was a good weekend and ready to attack this week, man. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, look, we love weekends, but when you get to answer fun mailbag questions, interesting mailbag questions, it's only so much of a bummer. We're excited to do this.
That's exactly
there are worse ways to spend a Monday. All right, so we have some fun story time at the end on the heels of one of the truly craziest things I've ever seen in an NFL weight room. So we'll do some fun story time at the end, just the craziest things that we've ever seen pro football players do in the weight room. But we're going to start off with some more substantive questions, Logan, including this one about Brian Robinson. It starts off, my question is about the running game. The short question is that I think there is more evidence that Brian is an average running back, not below average, not above average. Do you guys agree? Here's where we get a little long-winded, so bear with me. But I feel like there is some emotion from the local media to be protective of B-Rob, the player, because he's, from what I hear, such a good guy with a great story. And here are the layers to my point. A, if you have an elite-level running quarterback, it generally brings out career years from running backs, typically because teams can't zone in on the running back alone. See Alfred Morris with RG3, Barkley last season with Hurts, Derrick Henry with Lamar, etc. B, I've heard multiple times that the blocking scheme of this run game is inventive and at a minimum was good in the first half of the season. With that in mind, my question is, if so, shouldn't Brian Robinson have had a great season last year if he was truly an above average running back? Also, some local media members like to say that Brian was great early on, but just faded towards the end of the season when he got banged up. But if you go through this season game to game, that wasn't so. Brian was an inconsistent runner who wavered from good games to bad games from the jump, and that's easy to see if you go through his season game to game. The guy who actually fit the idea of being better earlier in the season and faded later on to an extent was Eckler, but not so much Robinson. Robinson had two of his best games in the first half of the season, but otherwise he almost alternated perfectly from good to bad game week to week. He was wildly inconsistent from game one. Thanks, Mike. All right, Logan. Lot to chew on there.
Yeah.
The simple, short version of the question is, how good's Brian Robinson?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good question. And I think he touched on a lot of interesting points there. So I don't know really exactly where to start. First off, I think I'd probably start with like what average running back play is in the NFL, right? I think, there's this kind of, at least in the fan base here, and again, fan bases across the NFL, that the guy you have is special. But really, oftentimes, like this has been my experience, like with tight ends, that I coach or when I played, like you come to the realization that there's a lot of good football players. There's a lot of guys that are very similar, in my case, to me, and you're not this unique wallflower. So like there's a guy like Brian Robinson probably approximating on every single team in the NFL. I think that's the thing with running back. We talk about it every year with the draft. We talk about it every year with free agency. You can find a quote unquote average starting running back relatively easy. I think the problem is that I think every fan wants there to be a, dynamic Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley type impact. And that's just not the case. That there's not that many athletes like that in the entire world. But B, we've talked about this a ton in terms of how the offensive line impacts running back play. And so I think it's interesting that when he talked about running backs that had good years last year that played with running quarterbacks, you're looking at the Philadelphia Eagles, which is one of the better offensive lines in football. You're looking at the Baltimore Ravens, which they, on paper, I thought outperformed what their roster kind of construction indicated, right? So like the sum of the parts was definitely better than the individuals themselves. And they've always had a very strong running culture. Like I've coached two guys over the last 6 years that have played there, and they spend a ton of time really kind of identifying themselves as a running team. And when you look at, their rushing totals, like obviously Lamar is a big part of that, but they can straight up get in ISO, like get in 22 personnel. So two tight ends, two backs, and run ISO at you. And they're big, strong. They get downhill. Picard does a great job. Derrick Henry does a great job. Their two interior guards do a nice job. So, and Linderbaum's one of the best centers in football. So I think it's somewhat misleading to use those teams as examples or points of comparison because you've got special running backs. You've got Derrick Henry and you've got Saquon Barkley, and then you've got one of the better offensive lines in football. And do those quarterbacks run? Absolutely. Does it help them? I'm sure to a certain extent it does. But I think you got to look at the whole picture when kind of aggregating. And so when you take that comparison and then you apply it to Brian Robinson in this case, like what I will say is that I think they did a really good job early in the year, the Washington Commanders, of elevating the offensive line. But as injury comes along, as teams get more exposure to the run schemes, I think the talent deficiency in the offensive line became very apparent. I think there's a reason that Adam Peters and this staff go out and they identify a bunch of, they traded for Laramie Tunsil. They draft an offensive lineman in the first round. They brought in a bunch of kind of what I would say solid backup rotational pieces to kind of add offensive line depth. Nate Herbig being at kind of the forefront of that conversation. So I do think there was a weakness on the offensive line. I think Brian Robinson is kind of the definition of an average running back. And I do think while the scheme was innovative, if you don't have the talent to run it, it becomes an issue as you move down the road. And again, the running quarterback thing is important. And we'll talk about this more after I let you, after you kind of give me your thoughts on what I just said. But there is a schematic element that sometimes leads to bad looks for the running back when you have a quarterback that scrambles or is part of the run game, if that makes sense.
Yes, there's a lot here that ultimately I think winds up saying like Brian Robinson is an average NFL running back, and
which is not a bad thing. I think that
right.
people they say that and people are like, oh my gosh, you think Brian's like. To be an NFL running back, you have to be a very good football player. I think Brian's a very good football player, just to be clear.
Right. And I think the next question, too, is like, well, what's the value of having an above average one? And I think that has been determined to like not be crazy high. Right. And so if that's the case, then like how much is it worth investing in monetarily in terms of salary cap space and or high draft capital? And this, like, there's actually no better example of this than Saquon Barkley. And people are like, wait, what? Saquon helped the Eagles win a Super Bowl last year. Yeah, but he was in the perfect system. So if you have all the other stuff, your running back can take you to an unbelievably high level. But if you don't have the offensive line or the quarterback, a la Saquon with the Giants, Saquon Barkley's not going to win you a ton of football games on his own. And so even though he's clearly way above average, you have to have the system in which to exist. By the same token, if you trade Saquon Barkley and Brian Robinson, I don't know that the Eagles still aren't the best team in football last year. Now, they're not nearly as good. Saquon was unbelievable. His home run, stuff late in games. Like, this is not to take away from Saquon last year. What he did was really special and helped them win games. Like, they're definitely not as good. But the Eagles roster was so good last year, I still don't know, again, that they're not the best team in football. And so if I think statistically about what it means to be an above average or average running back, there is a stat that Next Gen Stats uses called rush yards over expected, which would seem by definition to kind of be the definition of average. Like, hey, it's blocked for this. How often do you get more? And Brian Robinson was 0.1 yards rush yards over expected last year per rush. So, like, on average, he's getting exactly what is blocked and 0.1 yards more.
Right.
That's, like, he's, by that definition, he's as average can be.
Yeah, and I think, again, Saquon Barkley is a really good junk, and really Derrick Henry, too. Like, look at how kind of ineffective he was in Tennessee his last 2 years there. And then look what he did in Baltimore last year. He's kind of on pace for kind of an MVP caliber season, and obviously it doesn't work out for him because he kind of slows near the end of the year. But I do think that, like, even when you look at Saquon and what he did in Philly, like his, like, there, I forget what the exact statistic is, but it's basically like when you're like your stuff percentage, his stuff percentage is very, very high relative to the rest of the league. But because the offensive line there does such a good job of like creating good seams and creating space and getting him into his superpower, which is finding grass and being a great one-on-one kind of creative runner, he's more productive. So I think this is a tough question to kind of isolate B-Rob specifically because, yeah, like the offensive line, it's so critical. It's the same conversation in the draft we had with Ashton Genty and Omarion Hampton and all these backs that are coming out. Is like, is a back worth a first round pick? And obviously, like, if you say, oh, like Saquon for sure is worth a first round pick, or Bijan Robinson's worth a first round pick. But if you look at Atlanta, maybe this is a better example. They had invested a ton of first round capital in the offensive line over the years and had a group that was very, very good. So adding that cherry on the top makes Bijan Robinson extremely effective. So I look at that and I say, I think that's a good way to think about it. If you put Brian Robinson with, I don't know, the Baltimore Ravens, for example, like, is he as good as Derrick Henry? No. But is he 1,000 yards rusher? I think so. Like, I think if he can stay healthy over the course, and that's another thing that's important to talk about with regards to Brian Robinson, is he's nicked up a lot. You know what I mean? His running style, he's very physical, he's very big. Big backs tend to be a little bit more nicked because they take more contacts. And so I look at him and I say to myself, like, if he's healthy for the whole year, we're probably having a different conversation. But remember, he kind of had 3 games. He's nicked up. He's got, I forget the exact injury, but he's banged up for a couple of weeks. He's not quite 100%. He's back in there. He's back out. Like, that's another thing with running backs that's extremely important to think about. It's one of the reasons Derrick Henry is the best kind of power back of this generation. Marshawn Lynch was one of the best power backs of his generation, is because he can survive these contacts and play a lot of football games. So I look at that and I say, like, all of these things kind of come into this equation. And again, like, just on a pure talent standpoint, I think B-Rob's fine. I think he's a good player. I think he's maybe even slightly above average if you want to give him that. But you're never going to see the best version of him until he's healthy for the year and until the offensive line is a top 15 group, top 10 group in the league. And I think, and that's not an indictment of the guys that played last year, but I think there were times where you watched them against Pittsburgh, against Philadelphia, where they felt overmatched, and there's not a lot of space for the running back to go.
Well, and again, like you said, it depends on the superpower of each back. Like, some guys are great at dirty runs, and like their stats are never going to be amazing, but they get turned a bunch of -2s into +2s. And it's like, that guy averages 2 yards a carry. It's like, yeah, but he should be averaging -2. And so, like, if that's their superpower, that's one thing. If you're Saquon and you get stuffed all the time, but it doesn't matter because then you're going to hit a 60-yarder and more than make up for it, you want an O-line like Philly that's going to open up these big gashing holes. And B-Rob's running style, you know, where that fits along that spectrum is obviously a relevant factor here. I'm going to ask you the question, though, that I get all the time in like comments, et cetera. We didn't, formally get it in the inbox, but what about him versus Chris Rodriguez? Because if you look at the stats last year, like, Rodriguez is like, everything is a better stat. And I realize that these require context. There's the one game where he comes in and has like 100 yards or whatever in the fourth quarter. And it's like, okay, well, he got to go against a tired defense. He's fresh. Like, you can, I don't want to say make excuses, but you can contextualize till the cows come home on some of this stuff. But ultimately, when you look at rush yards over expected, EPA gain, like, all of the advanced metrics favor Chris Rodriguez as a runner by decent enough margins that I would call it significant. So when you watch those two and you look at all the non-running stuff, right? Because running back is also more than just a position that gets handed the ball and has to run.
Right.
It's pass blocking, it's receiving, it's, understanding your assignment. It's all that kind of stuff. There's a trust level with that position that's really, really vital. So when you look at those two players, why is Brian Robinson consistently being named the starter over Chris Rodriguez when the rushing statistics favor Rodriguez, albeit in smaller sample sizes?
Yeah, I think Brian Robinson's just a better athlete. Like, I think that's kind of the first highest level data point or bullet point I would point to. Like, he's just got a little bit more explosiveness, a little bit more twitch to him. Now, like what you said, I think I agree with it. I think the film supports it. Is Chris Rodriguez is better kind of at taking those, neutral runs and turning them into positive runs. And I prefer that running style for a runner. But like you said, it's more nuanced than that, right? So I look at B-Rob, and he's much more dangerous with the ball in his hands, catching the football, right? He can catch the football much more naturally, right? He's a little, again, like, he's more explosive. And I think that's one of the things that when you look at these top flight running backs, right? You look at the guys we just talked about, Saquon, Derrick Henry, Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, is they have an explosive playmaking ability. And I'm not sure that Chris Rodriguez has that on a down-to-down basis. Like, I think he's a special runner. He's a special runner at maximizing breaking tackles, but the ability to hit an explosive play is something that you can't necessarily coach. And I think that's where B-Rob's value over Chris Rodriguez starts to show up.
Yeah. I would have to do some quick math on the percentages here. Well, I guess it's kind of similar on this, but they track the GPS data, right? So I've got on NFL Pro in front of me the 10+ yard runs, and then the 15, like, how often do you hit 15 miles an hour? How often do you hit 20? And the only back to hit 20 last year for Washington was B-Rob. He did it one time. It was that 40-yarder against Tennessee. 15+ miles per hour on runs. Chris Rodriguez in 35 carries only hit that one time. Right. So that's 1 out of every 35 carries. B-Rob hit 15 miles an hour 18 times and 187 carries. So that's 1 in every 10. So if you want some numbers, some data to support that explosive, ability, even though Chris Rodriguez, more yards over expected, more rush EPA, more yards after contact. If you want the ability to be a home run and you add in like the screen game and the other things that B-Rob can do as a route runner, then you start to tell the tale of why Robinson is worth it as a starting back over someone like Rodriguez.
And that's why one of the reasons I'd say like B-Rob to me feels like average plus, because of the physicality. He's a big dude, man. He's 6'2", he's 225, almost 230. He can run, he can open up a little bit, he catches the football well. Like he's just a big athletic guy. And so I think one of the things that sticks out to me is like, can you be healthy? And like sometimes backs can't control that, but I look at the way like Derrick Henry works, the way that Nick Chubb works, the way that some of these guys that have been really iconic backs, they work off the field. Like they're able to kind of mitigate some of that stuff in terms of how they take care of their body. And B-Rob, the only reason I bring this up is because B-Rob is a relatively young player. And so a lot of times these young players haven't really figured out what it takes off the field to get there. And I have no inside baseball on that. I'm just saying based on my experience in an NFL locker room, that takes a couple of years, like I think about, Santana Moss tells these stories all the time. Guys will be in their third, fourth year. They wouldn't have guys taking care of them off the field. They wouldn't have a really good weightlifting program. They wouldn't have a massage therapist. And then that's where you get like a mentor and you're like, hey, that's the value of Austin Eckler to come in and be like, hey man, let's make sure that we're touching this the right way. We're hitting this lift on Monday where we're going to see the massage therapist afterwards. We're getting in the cold tubs. We're not going out to the wee hours of the morning. And I'm not saying that he is, but I just know young players, that's something that they do, right? It's the first time you get a lot of money, you go out and you have a good time. And the special ones are guys that don't always do that. So I think as he gets a little bit more mature, like hopefully he'll be able to take care of himself a little bit better. And because again, like he runs hard and I like guys who run like that, just there's a history of them being nicked up, right? And like, Alfred Morris is a great example. Like in the question, he mentioned Alfred Morris. Alfred Morris took care of himself at such a high level, right? And that's one of the reasons he was able to be so durable while getting all those touches. And so I think there's a little bit of that going on too, right? Is how do you like, what's your process? And again, like I do a lot of mentoring for young players coming in NFL through my agent. And one of the things is just like, what's your process? How do we take care of ourselves? And that's one of the biggest kind of coaching points. So again, I think, can he stay healthy for the year? Because again, the athleticism, the physicality, the mindset, it's there. It's just about kind of making sure it's all packed together for a full season. And again, I do think playing behind a better offensive line or a more physically talented offensive line is going to help any back that runs behind them.
No doubt about it. So we'll see, something to watch, not so much in the spring because running backs don't do anything meaningful in the spring. They do for their development, but not that we can see from an evaluation standpoint, but certainly something to watch in training camp and in the preseason games.
Yeah, and I think the one of the other quick points I want to touch on is someone in the question, I think you mentioned like quarterback run game and how that impacts running back success. So one of the things with RPOs and one of the things with zone reads, so zone read is like kind of your backs offset to the right. I'm reading the right defensive end. He's unblocked, and I'm going to pull it or I'm going to
read option in Madden.
Yeah, I'm reading that player. So you're not blocking a player in the defense. And if the read's not good or if the defense is running a specific stunt, you can run into some absolutely disastrous looks. And so I do think while there's this perception that it helps running backs, it helps your overall run game ecosystem. But oftentimes backs are running into bad looks. So another example is on an RPO as a point of comparison is I'm not reading the defensive end, but I'm reading the off-ball linebacker to the passing concept, right? If I make a misread or the linebacker plays it well, there's an unblocked player that's going to the hole that I'm trying to get to as a running back. So you do run into these looks with the quarterback run game where you're not blocking a player because of the quarterback's ability to run. But if the quarterback makes a bad decision or they present a different look or there's a numbers issue, right, into the zone read, like let's say, for example, the zone read's a good example. Like there's a 2 look out there. So there's a defensive end and a linebacker or safety right outside of them. They have dictated to me that I have to give that football. And so now you're not blocking a player and I can't pull it as a quarterback. And so the running back is going to run into a brick wall. And so like there's this perception that it helps you, it helps the back, but it actually doesn't help the back as much as it helps the whole running ecosystem. And people say, what about Derrick Henry and the great year he had? If you look at the runs he had, they're from the dot with a fullback getting downhill. It's not so much zone read stuff because it doesn't let his engine get going the same way. Saquon Barkley, like, look at what they did against us specifically. A lot of outside zone, a lot of bounce, a lot of perimeter stuff. It's not off the zone read or the option because they want to make sure they have hats for hats and let this running back do his thing. So I think that's something to keep in mind too when kind of framing the run game. Yes, a running quarterback helps raise the floor of your running game because you're going to get 600 yards rushing from a quarterback, right? But it can be detrimental to a back because it gives them muddy looks or ineffective looks to run into.
In other words, it helps the quarterback's side of the quarterback run game a lot to have a great back because defense is more likely to crash on that back or set things up where they're willing to take the risk on the quarterback pulling it. But that also means that the back is not necessarily set up for success. If you can manipulate that as a defense, then yikes for the back. That's a great point. Continuing on our mailbag here on the Take Command podcast, Logan Paulson there, Craig Hoffman here. And Logan, I feel like this question from Jamel feeds nicely off of our conversation we just had about Brian Robinson and the running game. Jamel says, question for you and Logan for the next mailbag. Last year, I felt like all we really ran was shotgun. So the last couple of games, I actually did a count of formations. I don't have the numbers anymore, but basically we ran shotgun 90%.
What a psycho.
Pistol.
You counted them all.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's like stuff that I would do on a game.
We appreciate that. We
formation.
appreciate your psychosis with counting formations. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like when I started tracking personnel midway through the year. So Jamel, salute. I get this on a fundamental level. But he says, basically we ran shotgun 90%, pistol 8%, and under center less than 2% of snaps. What are your thoughts on the lack of formations called? Do you believe that this hurts the offense? And what makes Kliff doing this different from what EB did doing the same thing? It's a great question, Jamel. I will say I think the premise is a little simplistic, but it's worth fleshing that out because there's a lot of meat on this bone that's really, really interesting to talk about. So I'm very excited to talk about this question. I would say first things first, shotgun is not a formation, right? Shotgun is a quarterback-specific alignment, as is pistol.
It's a
backfield set. Pistol, under center, same thing. And from those, you can do a lot of different stuff. When we talk about formations, we're talking about where's the location of the receivers, where's the location of the back, where's the location of the tight end. And the quarterback is certainly a part of that. Trips from under center with a bunch to the right is different than shotgun, with the same bunch to the right. Like those are called different things in the huddle, and defenses might react to them differently. And certain parts of the defense, right? The coverage structure might automatically check to one thing versus the front might do something different. So it is all very specific and probably too detailed to ever try to get into on a podcast because we need to, there's an endless amount of discussion about it. But I do think that shotgun provides certain advantages and certain disadvantages. Pistol, same thing. Under center, same thing. And when you talk about the variety within the offense, I think Kliff gets a lot of credit for doing a lot of different things, variety. It just so happens that, yes, 90% of it comes from shotgun, but there's other reasons for that we can and should get into.
Yeah, so I mean, just kind of to double click on this formation point, just as an example, let's say I want to be in 21 personnel and I want to be with a fullback on the field. I can go.
It's worth double clicking real quick. Personnel and formations are also different, right?
Different, right?
You can run the same formation with different personnel. So that's another way to add variety and spice to an offense.
Yeah. So for example, in this, let's go in this 21 personnel. You go I, which is stacked. You go strong, fullback stacked. You go weak, the fullback stacked to the left. And you go split back. And those are all the quarterbacks in the same position, but the backfield set is going to be different every single time, right? It's the same thing. For example, if I'm in gun, you lose a little bit of the flexibility, right? Because the back is going to be offset to the left or offset to the right. And there are certain checks you get from that, but that's one small feature of the offense. So for example, just as a point of comparison, let's say it's the tight ends to the right, the back's offset left. That's a different formation than if the tight end's to the right and the back's offset to the right. It's different. Each one of those is different. They create different stimulus for the defense. Let's say the tight end is now split out, right? That's a different formation with the same backfield action. So all of a sudden, when you start going through this, you're adding multiples in terms of what you're seeing in terms of formation to the defense. Now, to kind of just peel that back a little bit more, when you're in a gun run environment, usually gun runs tend to be a little bit more simplistic, right? So if the back's offset to my left, the back has to usually run across the quarterback's face to get the ball, right? Like think about like your traditional like zone read kind of setup. The back runs across. He's running from the left A gap to the right A gap. He's running from the left A gap to the right B gap. And there are checks that defenses make to account for that, right? I think the one thing that Kliff does a lot of really good stuff, but one of the things that sticks out is like he understands that. He understands that like defenses check to this alignment very frequently. So you'll see him bump the back. You'll see him switch sides during the cadence. You'll see him go from the pistol to offset so the defenses can't get the checks lined up. He knows how to insulate that formation at a really high level with a bunch of slight little shifts beforehand, right? And if I'm going to line up like this and I'm going to run across the formation, he also knows that if I run a bubble to that side, they have to defend the zone read to this side also. So let me just double click on that for a second, right? So back's running across my body, right? I'm reading the left.
So to reset this for a second, quarterback's in shotgun. The back is to the left of the quarterback.
Yes.
So that's where we're starting. And then we have multiple receivers. We're going to the same side as the run. So we have some kind of multi-receiver set where someone's going to block and someone's going to run a bubble screen out to the right because the back is to the left. He's going to come across the quarterback's face and get the ball, or the quarterback is not going to give it to him and throw the bubble.
So even just think about it at the most simplistic level. Let's say I go 2 by 2, right? And so there's 2 receivers to the right, 2 receivers to the left, the back's offset to the left. So I can throw a bubble screen to that side. I can pull it and throw a bubble screen to that side, or I can throw a slant, right? Depending on how the defense is defending. So I can run an RPO. I can run a zone read to that side. I'm getting a 3 by 1 with the tight end set over here. So 3 receivers to the left, tight end and a nub over to the right. And now they have to play the numbers game because they have to account for the running quarterback in this simple backfield action, right? And that's all just different formations. It's 2 by 2, 3 by 1. And then who's in the 3 by 1? Is it a tight end? Is it a receiver? Is it 13 personnel? Is it 21? And so I do think that like tracking backfield action isn't exactly a great indication of the diversity of an offense. So like just next time you're looking at it, like think bigger picture as opposed to just what the quarterback's doing. And then I think the second part of the question, which is how is this different than what EB is doing? This is a run first team. So even though they're in the gun and they're in the pistol, they are a run first team that likes quick game, likes RPOs, likes quick screens. So the ball's getting out of the quarterback's hand extremely quickly. So even though I'm in gun, Kliff, this offense, Jaden's in gun quite a bit, they're trying to run the football. They're trying to get the football out of the quarterback's hand as quickly as possible, especially on early downs, right? And occasionally they do a shot play action pass, keeper. There's some variety there, no doubt about it. But the thing about EB that was so incredibly frustrating as a point of comparison is they'd be in the gun and they'd be running a 5-step drop. So that is the quarterback is holding, he's in the gun, obvious passing situation. He's dropping 5 steps. So in the gun, it's 3 and a hitch. So he's at that 7-yard mark, which is basically one of the most difficult things for an offensive lineman to deal with is that 5-step drop from the gun. And again, you've got a rookie quarterback. You're not trying to get the ball out of his hand. There was no easy button. Kliff understood the most important position in football is the quarterback. I need to deleverage him. We're going to run the football. We're going to run a lot of quick game. We're going to give him some easy pre-snap reads to kind of deload so that when he's got to make that crazy explosive play down the field, he can put all his eggs in that basket and make the play we need him to make. And I think that's the difference. It's not that they're in the gun all the time. It's what they're doing from the gun and how they're insulating the plays that they run from the gun was drastically different with Kliff as opposed to EB.
Yes. And then I think you add 2 more layers onto that. I think the sequencing that Kliff has is phenomenal. And he thinks a lot about, we're going to do this now to do this other thing later. And the best example of like what really good sequencing looked like and why variety can be overrated in an offense is I think it was the 2021 Rams. Maybe it was the 2018 Rams. It was one of those, the early McVay teams. I'm trying to remember whether it was the year they still had Goff or whether it was the first year of Stafford. But they ran like 11 personnel. So 1 running back, 1 tight end, 3 wide receivers, 90+%. So they're in the same personnel grouping and they lined up in like not that many formations.
Right.
But what they did was, okay, our base play is this run play, but we're going to run that a lot. But we're going to play action off of that just enough that if you really sit on this run play, we have the perfect counterpunch. The second you lean in too far, here comes the haymaker back the other way. Or we'll take advantage of this other thing, but it's out of the same formation. So if you have one really good go-to that you're trying to get to on a regular basis into a good look, like a nice, safe running play that's going to get you 4, 5, 6 yards, or if it hits, could get you 10, 12, or however many yards is left between you and the end zone. And then you have the perfect counterpunch that is on stacked on top of that. And the defense knows it. And they know the counterpunch is more dangerous than what you're trying to do. They have to protect against the counterpunch. You can't get knocked out. And so Kliff takes that and says, okay, we're going to have some similar looking things at times, and we're going to run them fast. So we're going to be at tempo, which is Kliff's kind of magic weapon that he unleashed at a rate that was higher than anyone else in the league, not only last year, but then we've seen in years, and said, okay, now defense, you think you've seen this before, but we're going to do this other thing. Or we might do the same thing again, but you don't have time to prepare. You're just going to have to react quickly. And so whether it's the little subtle shifts that you talked about of like, okay, hey, we have this automatic check-in. We're on our P's and Q's because we know they're trying to go fast. Oh, crap, now the back's on the other side right before the snap. Do we check again and go back to the other side, or do we just play with the way we are right now? You don't have time. We're going quickly. Or, hey, we're trying to make a call on the fly, so the defense is simple to begin with because we don't have time to get in a huddle and get a new call. We're just trying to match this formation. And maybe it's the same formation that Kliff, and now we're in the third quarter, Kliff ran that in the first quarter. He knows, hey, if we present this look again, they're going to check to this because we're going fast and they've only got 5 calls they can get to. And now we can call the perfect play out of this formation that we're running for the second time today. We know what the defense is going to be, and it's shooting fish in a barrel. So like these are the kinds of things that Kliff does that are at a really high level versus where EB, it very much felt like we're going to try to run this, it's 3rd down and 8. We're going to go 5-step drop and we're running mesh. And it's like everybody knows it every single time. It was very predictable, very high leverage.
Like mesh would be a better call. Like he was running like deeper developing concepts. And again, when you've got a guy like Patrick Mahomes who's creative and can see and do some different stuff with his arm angles, like that works, but it was ineffective.
Sorry, it was Scott who loved mesh. I was like, one of the
Scott
OCs
loved mesh. He loved
that dude.
mesh.
It was 3rd and 5 to 3rd and 12. We were running mesh,
which is a great play. Like, no, I'm not going to knock mesh. It's a really effective play, but it was very consistent. So I think you hit a lot of great points there, and I think the comparison to the LA Rams is a really good one because one of the things that they've done, and it kind of goes back to the RG3 question, is sometimes you present something to a defense and they don't have a good answer. So, for example, with them, they had receivers that were really physical, that understood the run game, and they could run from 11 personnel, and basically they were getting a matchup with a receiver, so Puka Nacua, on a nickel player or a linebacker that they felt that he could win in the run game, and he could. And then all of a sudden, now they're like, shoot, well, we got to get out of this. Like I remember there was a game, they were playing Baltimore 2 years ago, and they ran duo, and they ran it a bunch of different ways. They ran it with an insert, they ran it the same side, and Puka Nacua is an absolute maniac. And they ran the ball, I want to say, Craig, like 12 consecutive times, 10 consecutive times, something like that. And then I'll be damned, so they went down the whole field, scored a touchdown. The next series, Baltimore comes out in their base with an extra linebacker. So, instead of nickel, they're in their 3 linebackers. And all of a sudden, they just run play action pass for explosive plays. And then all of a sudden, then they go hurry up and they get them stuck in the space personnel and they're just ripping them apart down the field. And so, and it's the same thing with Robert, with Robert when he was here in 2012, defenses didn't have a good answer because they'd never seen it before. And so I love that you brought up this comparison with Kliff because he has enough variety at the tempo that they operate at that gets defenses uncomfortable and gets them in bad looks, really. And I think the other thing to talk about in terms of formation is just the width of the splits, like making defenses define what they're in. Like he did a really good job of getting to some of that stuff, especially in the Detroit game in the playoffs. So the question I think is good. Like the underlying thing of the question is good, but like just quarterback backfield position does not tell you enough about what's going on offensively. There's so much more going on, like the type of play that's being run, how they're insulating, the sequencing like you're talking about, the tempo, and then the general formation is the other element there. So there's much more nuance than just backfield action. And so to compare an offense based on that, it's going to really limit, because I think if you looked at like Baltimore, for example, they're in the gun and pistol a lot also. But their offense is drastically different than what Kliff does because of all the quarterback run stuff that they get to, or how they get to some of their quarterback run stuff. So I think it's an interesting talking point. But again, don't look at the backfield, look at the whole thing and see and see what we're getting to there. So
hopefully that answers the question, Jamel. Take Command Podcast. I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulson. We're answering your mailbag questions that you can submit at Hoffman.sports, on Instagram at Logan_Paulson82, or like Trevor did at HoffmanShow.com using the contact link. And Trevor says, hey, Craig, can Logan talk next time y'all do a mailbag about why, if center requires such high intelligence and athleticism, why aren't they valued more in the draft and free agency? So, Logan, can you do that?
Yeah, I think so. So first off, I'm going to say that center's really hard to play. It's a very, very hard position to play. So the next thing I'm about to say is going to sound like it's counter to that, but just know, like, having a good center is very important to your offense. Like the way they call protections, the way they ID runs, like all this stuff's extremely important. However, when you look at kind of base defenses in the NFL, so let's say we're in a 4-down front, so 4 defensive linemen. They're going to be in some type of over front. So the 3 technique is going to be to the run strength, right? The 3 technique is the person that lines up over the guard. They usually put that person to the side of the run strength. And then there's going to be a backside shade. And so in that specific look, the center is not covered. Like, he's uncovered. And on 90% of 4-down structures, probably even more than that now that I'm thinking about it, the center will not have someone over his face where he's going to have to block them one-on-one. It is very rare in a 4-down spacing. So, like, there are games where you're watching centers in a 4-down structure where they will actually not block anybody one-on-one the entire game. So, despite the physical and mental demands of the position, like, I don't want to have to snap and reach a play side shade. I don't want to do that. But I will say I'm helped by the fact that the guard can help me kind of be on the double team. I'm always going to have help in a 4-down structure. So I look at that and you say, if a team is playing 4-down, the center might not ever be in a block by himself. And that, to me, devalues the position, because while you need to find really good athletes, you need to find smart guys that can do that. And you see the value, much like running back, of getting like a playmaking center. Tyler Linderbaum, Humphreys, Jason Kelsey's a good example. You see the value of those players. The players that are in more consistent one-on-ones, that have to win more consistent one-on-ones, are your guards and your tackles. Like, look at Chris Jones, for example. He plays 3 technique. Aaron Donald plays 3 technique. Von Miller plays outside edge rusher, right? I need a guy that can beat that guy or win a one-on-one versus that guy, right? And so I think it's really interesting. Like, Jason Kelsey on his podcast just had a conversation about his welcome to the NFL moment. And he said for the first 5 weeks of the NFL season, he never had a head-up nose. And then they played the Cowboys, and it was Jay Ratliff. And Jay Ratliff got after him because he'd never had to pass protect a true nose before. And you see that all the time. Like, a center can go through the whole season. You're like, look at their PFF grades. It's a really good way to do it. Green, great job. Blues. Then they get a red, like a 20. And you're like, what happened? You go turn on the film,
3-4 team.
and it's a 3-4 team, usually, right? And so now, with how much nickel teams are playing, you're going to get more 4-down structures than ever, because you don't play an odd spacing in nickel usually. I mean, in college sometimes you see it, but usually that's not the case. So there's certain times centers for weeks at a time, 6, 7, 8 weeks, will never have an individual one-on-one block. And I think, again, like, what they do from a mental standpoint is extremely challenging, extremely important. Like, I think about what Tyler did last year, how effective he was, and how he raised the floor of that group with his movement skills and stuff. But ultimately, because they're not in one-on-ones as much as other positions, like, I'm going to devalue them a little bit.
Yeah. In many ways, I like the center to running back comparison, because it's like, if you have a bad one, you're going to notice. Like, if you have a center who is not on top of the calls, if you have a center who doesn't give the requisite help, if you have a center who can't block anyone in the run game, like, you're going to notice. If you have an average center, your offense is just going to operate, and there's going to be no real noticeable difference. In the same way that if you have a Brian Robinson, like, solid running back, it's like, okay, the run game, typically you run it on first down. We're somewhere between 2nd and 7 and 2nd and 5. Like, cool. And sometimes it's way better, and sometimes it's worse. If you have a great one, then you also notice, and you're like, oh wow, that was really special. I can't believe that block happened. And you got some really excited analyst on TV circling him on the telestrator, being like, can you believe Jason Kelsey got out in front of this guy? Or can you believe Creed Humphrey hit this block? And Collinsworth is all steamed up on Sunday Night Football. And like, that's kind of it. So the question in terms of value is, how hard is it to find an average one? And the reality is there's enough centers out there that you can find an average one later in the draft. You don't have to pay an exorbitant amount of money, just like the Commanders didn't pay exorbitant money for Tyler Biadasz. Tyler Biadasz is a really good center. And maybe there's like, I don't know, 5, 6 really. I mean, who are the really good centers that are currently in the league? Humphries,
Linderbaum is the one that comes to mind. And then maybe Bradbury in Minnesota, but he was hurt all last year. You know what I mean? Like there's
like, let's say there's somewhere between 3 and 5. And then like, if we're doing Madden ratings, right? And those guys are 90 plus guys, there's like 15, 20 guys that are all 85s. Like they're just solid. And so what average is gets the job done in the league. And unfortunately for those guys specifically, that decreases your contract values and your draft status because it's not as hard to find as say finding an average corner is really hard. That's why teams spend, first and second round picks hoping that those guys work out because corner is such a volatile position. It's just not that volatile of a position at center. And thus you're able to find guys that can do well enough for not that much money.
Yeah, and again, I think playing center is really hard. There was a coach who asked me to move to center late in my career, and it scared the hell out of me because you're like, this is a tough thing to do. It's tough to go toe-to-toe with these big guys on the interior, call plays, and get the snap off and blah, 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 blah. But again, like part of me was like, this might not be a bad idea because I'm never going to have to one-on-one pass protect ever again. And even if it's a good nose, you can like find ways to insulate them, like with slides and things like that. And the other thing, just to your point, Craig, like in terms of finding an average center, pretty much every guard that I played with, like every single guard that I played with over the course of it. So we're talking hundreds of players could also snap. And so you run into these guys that are really good guards that are better centers because again, they don't have to get into this one-on-one. Like Will Montgomery is a great example of this. Like he was a fine guard. Struggled a little bit, but you moved to center and he was like one of the highest graded players. He had the highest graded, in 2012, he was the highest graded player by PFF on the offensive line, like in the league for like 7 weeks in a row. You know what I mean? Because again, he was a little bit of a liability at guard, but was fine at center because he's never in a one-on-one situation. So I think that's something to just keep in mind. Like not only is the position in terms of physical demand somewhat lower than like a guard or a tackle, but there's also there's how many offensive linemen in the NFL? 1,000, 900. I'd say half of those guys could also play center. Like there's just a plethora of people that know how to snap. Like some tackles I played with, like JC Latham at the combine, for example, last year played center in some drills because he can snap. So you can just find people to fit that role from a movement standpoint, from a physicality standpoint. Again, they can be smaller builds. You don't need the priority of saying we need this 6'5", 35-inch arm guy to do it. Like you can hide some of those deficiencies on the interior at that spot a little bit more effectively.
You really think I'm going to let you just slide by telling us that you were asked to switch to center late in your career and not double click on that story?
It was like floated to me. I was getting pretty big. I was like 275. I was like my team's value was getting a little bit low, and like one of my buddies. So I was playing for Atlanta at the time, and he called me out of the blue. He's like, "Man, have you ever thought about switching to center?" And I was like, "I mean, if the price is right, I probably would do it. I need like a year to figure it out." He's like, "I'd think about it if I was you." And I was like, all right. And that's about as much as I thought about it was that conversation. Because that was year 9 for me, like year 8 or 9. And I was kind of like, I don't know, man, that'd be a tough switch, but that wouldn't be a bad deal. If I could figure out how to snap, that was the other thing. Figuring out how to snap was high on the priority list. But in retrospect, I probably should have done it. I probably should have figured out a way, maybe year 6, 7, to start making that transition because I was getting slower. I just had that foot surgery, and I was really good in the run game. So like go in there, be a little sneaky, hide in there, call runs. I knew every single run call anyway, so when that part wouldn't have been hard. So probably should have done it in retrospect.
Well, now you get to be NFL tight end Logan Paulson for the rest of your life, as opposed to NFL tight end turned center. Which just doesn't, I don't know. I guess that's kind of a cool bit.
It would have been a wacky, for sure.
Yeah.
Wacky bit.
All right. Well, now we got that story. Let's do a little bit more story time to wrap up here. Just a little fun at the end, Logan. Rams punter, and this is another mailbag question from Craig in DC. That's me. Rams punter Ethan Evans. The Rams released a video of him squatting 705 pounds this week at OTAs or last week at OTAs. He apparently also this offseason posted a video of himself deadlifting 800 pounds. That's
Is
a
he
lot.
the guy that was the decathlete in college? So there was a punter a couple years ago. What school did he go to?
I think Wingate.
Yeah, so he had one of the freakiest combines in the last 4 years. He's 6'5" or 6'6". He's is this the guy 250, 245? And
you're asking me a lot of questions about the Rams punter right now. Give me a second.
He ran a 4.59, and he had a 40-inch vertical, and everyone's like, oh, he's going to move to tight end because he's so freaky. And he had all these crazy strength metrics because I think he was a track athlete that was moonlighting as a punter and then realized he was going to make more money punting. I think this is the guy. I don't remember, but I should have looked it up before we got on the show. Probably it would have been a good move by me, but
I don't know. I don't know that I'm seeing.
Let's see. What's his name?
Ethan Evans. He played football and track in high school, but it does look like he was more of a special teams guy in college. I'm not seeing anything. It might not be. I tried to quickly look and see if I could find the beast from the year he came out because we know that Dane would have all the information. But yeah, I mean, this is insane strength metrics.
I mean, that's insane by any position. You know what I mean? Insane by any position, any category. I don't think I ever saw anybody squat 700 in the NFL while I was there. I mean, I saw some crazy stuff.
Well, that's what I was going to get to, right? What I was going to get to is, what's the craziest thing you ever saw one of your teammates do in a weight room?
I mean, the list is literally endless. So, what's his name? Adam Carrier. He was a defensive tackle when I was here in 2011, 12-ish. He would routinely grab the 200-pound dumbbells for his warm-up set and bang them out for sets of 10. So
on a
that
bench?
was pretty, on incline dumbbell press.
What?
Crazy.
That's dumb.
Philip Daniels on his recovery day would deadlift 680 and squat 655 for sets of 5. That was his down day. Ziggy Hood, is that name? That's right, Ziggy.
Yeah.
He on Monday would come in and squat 550 for sets of 8. Just as he's like, I'm like, why are you squatting so much? He's like, oh, I just got to get loosened up. And I was like, oh, really? That's more than I can think about in my life. Trent Williams, I remember one time he was talking smack to Ray Wright. He didn't want to lift. I think I've told this story before. And Ray's like, if you can bench 500 a day, you don't have to work out the rest of the time. And Trent, 135, 225, 315, what is it? 405.
405, yeah.
Yeah, 495 and then 500 and just left the weight room. That was pretty crazy. And that was when Trent wasn't lifting. He was kind of still he was his rookie year, so he was kind of
still didn't have his mentor yet.
Correct. Still didn't have his mentor yet. Joey Galloway, I remember one time he was talking crap to Chad and he was like, I could hang clean. It was it 405 for a set of 5? And Chad's like, impossible. And he's like, if I do this, you don't have to work out for the rest of the month. And so Joey walked out, grabbed his lifters, grabbed some straps. I don't even know if he warmed up, man. I honestly don't remember. Because I was working out. So he left the weight room, came back in, and I'm telling you, he hang cleaned whatever it was, 365, 405 for a set of 5. Bam, 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 bam. Dropped the weight, left the weight room, and we didn't work out for the rest of for a month. There are some absolute freaks, man. Everyone's like, oh, and people think, oh, powerlifters lift more or strongmen lift more, but these dudes, this is their part-time gig, and they're just throwing weight around. Vernon Davis was one of the freakiest human beings. Obviously, because his combine's crazy, but I remember we had a Tendo unit, so it's a unit that measures bar velocity.
Yep.
Right. And so we're working up to sets, and everyone's like, make sure the velocity is over 1.4, which is fast. The bar's moving very, very quickly.
Yeah,
so
1.4 meters per second.
So I got to 250, and I was right at 1.4, and I was like, I should probably stay here because I really want the bar to be moving quickly. And then Vernon puts on 315, and he's in the 1.9s, and I was like, what is this? And then he puts on 405 and is like in the 1/8. So he was bench pressing 405 faster and more explosively than I could probably squat 405. Like that's how strong and explosive that dude was. And he'd come in and just do crazy stuff, do the jump test, do like a 43-inch vertical. And he was 35 at the time. Like just like you realize, like everyone talks about like how, freaky this high school player was or freaky this college. Like the NFL is like the natural selection of the freakiest human beings of all time. Like really, it's Julio Jones. I saw Julio Jones box squat 585, with chains, and the chains weighed about 200 pounds each. It was a high box, but I was like, oh my God, you're only like 220. So, and people are like, oh, like they take it, like, no, that's genetic variation, man. There are just freaky, strong, athletic, fast dudes. Trent Williams used to run with the skill guys for gassers just to be like, so gassers or half gassers, so down and back. He used to be able to run that in 14 seconds for a set of 8. And he's 330. So like, I don't want to, like, they're just freaky mutants. The punter's obviously a freaky mutant, but man, like it was NFL's crazy, man. NFL is crazy.
Yeah. The one like fun story I've got I've heard a bunch of stories. Trent, obviously there's a million. I did a piece on him back in like 2018 or something like that. 2017, somewhere in there. And Adrian Peterson told me about when, they were freshmen at Oklahoma and Trent did like a 360 windmill dunk standing flat-footed under the rim in slides. Yeah. She's like, what? Yeah. We're wearing basketball shoes. We're wearing flip-flops. So that's nuts. Me personally, I've told this story before. I don't know if I've told it on this show, but I worked out with Lorenzo Alexander. Zoe came to my gym and he brought a couple of high school kids with him. And I happened to be on that particular day, and these are high school football players. I was probably like 27 at the time, something like that. And I was the second heaviest lifter in the group. I grabbed half of every weight that Zoe did. Yeah. Half. And the craziest thing was we did RFE sticks, so rear foot elevated split squat, where your front foot, the foot that you're working, is like smacking the ground. So it's like an explosive single leg jump with weights kind of thing. I'm doing it with 55-pound dumbbells, which is pretty good. Yeah. Pretty good. Zoe is doing 110-pound dumbbells. And he weighs 245, 250 pounds at the time. Yeah. Like this is his Buffalo days. Like that's insane. I couldn't get those dumbbells off the ground. And if somehow I did, if they were handed to me at the top of that movement and I tried to then like do one rep, my knee would have exploded.
Yeah. They're all like that. Like Ryan Kerrigan, like I remember when he first came in, like the way he squatted, the way the bar moved, like it just moves so fast. And you can see like the different type 2 muscle fibers and Zoe. Zoe's a freak, but like that's not freaky compared to other people that I've, you know 100%. What I mean? Like, it's unbelievable. Like watching Austin Eckler, like last year work out, I was like, oh, you're back squatting on like an easy day, 405 ass to grass, like or 450 ass to grass. You know what I mean? Like for sets of 8. And it's just like, and you're 31. You know what I mean? Like it's just unbelievable what some of these guys can do. And when you see them lift and you see the bar move and you see them jump and you see them sprint, everything about them makes sense and why they're so good and why they played so long. Like they have such good strength reserve. They have such good speed reserve. Like it just, like I was never super strong. Like I'm strong compared to like average person, but like compared to NFL person, I was pretty in the middle. Like Fred Davis, I remember he used to come in and pop out like the 150s on dumbbell incline press for sets of 15, sets of 12. And like, not even like, it was like, like when you go to the gym and you see someone grab the 50s and they're like warming up. Yeah. Like that's how it looked when Fred did it. And you're just like, what? Like Cooley used to squat 550, like on like before his knee surgery. So like, dude, just it's a crazy landscape of people with bad technique that are just crazy strong and explosive. And like, you're just like, I don't know what's going on here, but it's wild.
That would be fun to just enter an NFL guy into a powerlifting meet. Just like no practice. Hey, dude, these are the rules. You have to squat past parallel. You're going to get 3 shots at a single rep. Here you got a deadlift, and then you're going to bench. You tell me what numbers you want to do, and just see how they do.
Well, dude, even this punter, man, like, that's an amazing total. Like an 800-pound, like he weighed 235. That's an amazing total. like 800-pound deadlift, like that's awesome. 7, like he'd win most regional powerlifting meets like easily, and he's borderline nationally competitive. You know what I'm saying at those numbers. So kind of unbelievable. Not kind of, it is unbelievable.
Yeah, that's crazy. And what does he use it for? Sending
Hunting.
a football to the moon. That's cool. All right, that's our show. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll do it again next Monday in terms of the mailbag. Again, your questions can get sent to us at Hoffman.sports, at HoffmanShow.com, or at Logan_Paulson82, Instagram, the web, etc. And then we will recap day 2 of open OTAs. Obviously, this will be day 4 as they practiced without us. How dare they? On Thursday and Friday of last week. But we get into the continuation of phase 3 of OTAs later in the week. We'll recap it for you then. For Logan, I'm Craig. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching and listening to Take Command.